Good evening, and welcome to tonight, October 12th meeting of the Shrewsbury School Committee. I'd first of all like to thank Liz Poplowski and the members of the Shrewsbury Media Connection for this recording and our live broadcast. This meeting will be rebroadcast on Channel 29 between now and our next regular school committee meeting. It's also available on the SMC YouTube channel. The first item on our agenda is public participation. Tonight, nobody has expressed interest in addressing the committee. However, if in the future anyone wishes to participate in this portion of our meeting, they should contact the chairperson prior to beginning of the meeting. And once recognized, they'll have up to 3 minutes to present their material. The committee will also review and consider any written comments which may be presented to us before or after the meeting. The next item on our agenda is chairperson and members' reports. Does anyone have anything for us this evening? Nope. I would just like to note that this morning, Patton School did a Safe Routes to School program, a walking program to encourage more walking. I will say there was lots of enthusiasm in my house, even though we had to drive to then do the walking. We weren't quite close enough, but appreciate the efforts to kind of think about walkability in our town and how that relates to particularly getting to our neighborhood elementary schools. And I know they've invited many members of the community to support and make that happen. All right, our next item on the agenda is Superintendent's report. Dr. Sawyer.
Thank you. Just to add on to that, I know that Mr. Wensky actually was involved with some work with the town around the town's planning, making the town more walkable. And I know that Dr. Lazat, when she was principal at Patton, or acting principal, and Dr. Mulcahy at Patton has taken that mantle over. And I happened to see Dr. Lazat today, and she mentioned that she was part of it, and it was a really big success. I think she'll be sending out some photos of the different groups walking to Patton, and something that over time, I think we're doing some work with Sherwood on this as well. We'll look to extend that after we try it out in a few different places. So it was a big success today, and of course, perfect weather, so that was great. I did want to just start off by acknowledging a town official who's recently left our community, Angela Snell, who for many years has been the leader of our Parks and Recreation program. When the town reorganized, it also was involved with our public buildings as well as parks and facilities. And over the years that I had the pleasure of working with Angela, she was always a terrific collaborator, extremely supportive of partnerships with the school district. Of course, a lot of partnership was required, shared spaces in terms of Parks and Rec using our facilities for a variety of their programs, especially our gymnasiums. As well as them taking care of our fields and athletic facilities across our campuses. But again, she's now, for those who don't know, she's moved on to an opportunity as the new assistant town manager in my hometown of Clinton, just up the road, where I'm sure she'll do a terrific job. But I just wanted to publicly thank Angela for all her contributions to the community over the time that she's been here. And I know she's also been the proud parent of 2 of our students over the years as well. So thank you to Angela for all she's done. Secondly, just want to let the community know, anybody who's watching when this is broadcast the first time on Wednesday, or if it's still Thursday, October 13th is the fall concert at Shrewsbury High School. Various performing ensembles will be having their first concert of the year. That begins at 7:30 p.m. in the auditorium at Shrewsbury High School, and tickets are available at the door for those who are interested in attending, and our music ensembles do an amazing job, and looking forward to that. And then finally, I did want to let the committee know, and there'll certainly be a more detailed report at a future date, but one of the benefits, and we'll talk in a moment about some of the feedback we received about the beginning of the school year, is that it is a more quote-unquote normal type of school year so far, and that includes being back to being fully in swing with various activities and clubs and various co-curricular opportunities for our students. I just wanted to remind those watching that as a result of a policy decision the school committee made last year, that we removed the activity fee at our middle schools and high school to try to reduce any barriers there might be to students participating. Anecdotally, we're having a lot of participation, there's a lot of interest in a variety of things. And again, from athletics to academic teams such as robotics and speech and debate to all the various clubs and after-school activities that we offer. In addition to that, something that we returned on a pilot basis last spring and have continued this year is the late bus program for Sherwood Oak and the high school. This is an opportunity for families, or for students who might not be able to be picked up by their family after their after-school activity at their school, and may not have an opportunity for a ride, to be able to be, there's 3 different routes that go around town. Obviously, we can't do door-to-door service, that's not feasible, but we try to have some various locations where it might be easier. In some cases where a student might be able to walk the rest of the way home, and others where it might be more feasible for a student to get a ride that may not be as convenient to get to the school campus. And we're seeing some good participation. At some point, once this is up and running for longer, we'll be able to give some statistics to the committee. But again, 2 ways that we're trying to reduce barriers, because we know it's so important for our students to be able to participate in something that they're passionate about or interested in or want to try out within our school community. And that is Superintendent's report this evening.
Great, thank you very much. Our first time scheduled appointment this evening is on the Family Feedback Survey, and this is a report. As the district nears the completion of its current strategic plan and begins creating a plan for improvement over the next 5 years, stakeholders will have multiple opportunities to share their thoughts and provide feedback, including using an online platform thought exchange. And in September of 2022, families were invited to participate in an anonymous online exchange to share what was working well so far and any questions. I know, Dr. Sawyer, you're here to share some of those results. As a parent who went to 3 curriculum nights, I got it 3 times as a reminder, and in many newsletters, so I hope people were able to participate, but please, tell us more about what you've learned.
Thank you. Certainly, it was very helpful feedback that we received. I just want to remind everyone that a key part of our mission is that we're partnering with the community, and of course that means our family community as well, and their feedback is important to us, along with our core values of collaboration and communication in particular. We did have an online anonymous exchange using the Thought Exchange platform, which we've used at various times over the last several years to ask our families for feedback. The prompt they received, just an open-ended question: now that we've started the new school year, please share what's working well for your child or your children, and any questions or concerns you might have for the year ahead, just to sort of capture some thinking around how things were going just with this initial phase of the school year. And we did provide flyers each of the curriculum nights, which were very well attended, and did put it in newsletters, as Ms. Heffernan just mentioned. An overview of the participation: we did have 729 participants in the exchange who shared 518 separate, what the Thought Exchange calls thoughts, essentially comments or questions. The way Thought Exchange works is that people, after they have an opportunity to weigh in and share multiple thoughts, they actually then get to rate thoughts that others have submitted on a 1-star to 5-star basis. And what that enables us to do is get a sense of what sentiments others are agreeing with to a high degree, and what sentiments people are disagreeing with or not as much in agreement with. You can see that there were 15,248 separate thoughts rated by people who participated in the exchange. And the ratings ratio that's listed there of 29 means that's the average number of thoughts someone rated when they actually were rating people's thoughts, which I'm told by the person we work with at Thought Exchange, that's a very high ratio. They suggest 25 to 35 ratings, but often they only see maybe 10 or 15. So it's really appreciate the level of participation people put into it, because it obviously gives us a better sense of that. The way the algorithm works is that each thought is regardless of whether it was in the exchange early or later on, it's rated roughly in the same range of the amount of time, so that there's some equivalence. Doesn't mean a thought that was in the exchange earlier has more ratings or significantly more ratings than one that came in later. And they're generally rated somewhere on the average of about between 25 and 30 plus times. You can see that of the people who participated, 342 people actually included comments, 373 people actually rated them, and 316 people looked through it, didn't necessarily write a comment or rate them, but did explore what other people had written. This is just a sense of 97% of the people who participated in English. It is translated through Google Translate, and so there were a small number of people who chose to participate in the exchange by utilizing the translated version. People were able to check off which school they had children attending. Percentage-wise, it roughly lines up with how the student population of each school relative to the total participation. People could check more than one school, of course, if they had children in multiple schools. It isn't the way I'm presenting the information to you this evening, but when we reviewed the data, our leadership team has reviewed the data twice already, you can filter it by school. And the way this works, unlike maybe some other more traditional online surveys like SurveyMonkey, for example, you can't filter it out. There's no way of knowing who gave what thought. That's totally anonymous. So you're not filtering as to, well, these thoughts came from people at this particular school or that particular school. What it does do is it shows you how the people who checked off that they belong to that school community rated the different thoughts. So there are some slight differences, for example, of the thoughts that were rated most high by families from an elementary school and maybe some that were rated by families who were connected to Shrewsbury High School. So principals are able to filter it that way and kind of look at their own data where there might be some slight differences. But what I'm giving you tonight is just the overall rating in the entirety of those who participated. This is just a word cloud that comes with the program when we can analyze the data. And I think that it does capture, and obviously the larger the word, the more it was found within the different comments that were made. It's really certainly pleasing to see that people are feeling that things are more back to normal. You see words like happy and comfortable. You see things like focus on children and communication. So just kind of a general way to look at what was mentioned most frequently. In terms of the top-rated thoughts themselves, I'll summarize these as we go through. It's probably easier to see this on the screen at home, perhaps, than it is here in the meeting. But the first several thoughts that were rated most highly, these are the top-ranked thoughts out of the 518 that were submitted. Really a lot of comments talking about how happy they were to be back, that things felt more comfortable, more typical, kids feeling connected, having school events, sports, and sense of normalcy. The fact that we're not requiring masks, not social distancing, that socialization is more of what people are experiencing. The next group, again, just going down the line, communication came up a lot as something that was perceived to be strong, that the schools did a good job communicating at the start of the school year. Again, extracurricular activities, being back with friends, strong communication. Some more comments about communication in these next group. Positive energy, kids feeling comfortable in their environment. There was actually in what we see, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but sometimes there are some suggestions with regard to how we could maybe do this better, and when we are going to be using another thought exchanges, we do some of our strategic planning this fall, and we do plan to separate out some exchanges by school, so you can actually, sometimes a thought someone would be asked to rate was very specific to the high school, but they might be an elementary parent or vice versa. So that's good advice, and that's something that we can take into account in future exchanges. More time for lunch. That was something that got a lot of agreement. The kids could benefit from some more time eating and not having to rush, or a perception that they're rushing through their lunches. Again, some more comments around normalcy and a perception of normalcy. A comment looking for healthier school lunch options was strongly agreed with. The idea that structure and routine is very good for our kids right now, and some more appreciation for teachers keeping families up to date. Again, continuing I took about the top, I think, 33 thoughts, and we'll talk about some of the ones that were rated less favorably in a moment. But some being pleased with transition, how things are being able to focusing on in terms of kids getting things ahead of time as far as schedules, again, just a sense of being able to have kids in a sense of routine. Similar themes with these as well. Some appreciation for how well organized the schedule was this year. Some appreciation for the curriculum nights, or family nights as some people called them, good transitions, building great relationships with teachers. And the last one here, number 33, was an emphasis on kindness and community that people felt was very positive. So, these were the 33 of the 500 plus thoughts. Those are the 33 that were rated the highest by people who were responding. When we shift to the other end of the spectrum, and that's important for us to look at as well, and of course, we've reviewed all of the thoughts, and there's a lot of similar themes throughout that may have been rated more in the middle. When you start to look at those who were not rated as favorably, again, it doesn't mean that the comment doesn't have value. It just means there weren't as many people who maybe agreed with it or rated it, that they were feeling that similarly to that person. So going kind of from the 33 down to the lowest rated thought, there was some concern from a couple of people or someone that they weren't getting a response that they wanted as quickly as they'd like. One that talked about good communication, but for some reason that thought didn't get rated very highly. A concern that we should not have a dress code at Shrewsbury High School. There was a concern about the desks not being comfortable when they were themselves at curriculum night. I know certainly when I sit in the elementary desk, given my size, I'm not that comfortable, but we certainly try to make that as reasonable as we can for the kids. Concern about the health curriculum being too focused on nutrition and not emphasizing mental health. I think depending on which year the curriculum is, there is a lot of emphasis on mental health, but that's that person's perspective. So that's something for us to pay attention to. Some sense that we're not teaching finance as well as we could. A sense that we're not providing as much structure or discipline in class as they might like. That's a perception one commenter had. Question about relying too much on iPads, which was something we saw, kind of a thread that we saw throughout. There's some people who were appreciative of the connection, other people, concerned about the amount of screen time or utilizing the tool, or concerns about, perhaps over-relying on it. Some people talking about, maybe getting some more information. As a high school parent felt that they weren't getting as much information at that level as they might have at the elementary level. Some looking for some more detailed academic updates. A comment feeling that the pendulum has swung too far, that there's not enough homework. And again, something to take into consideration. I'll refer back to this in a little bit, but this wasn't, this was ranked 492nd out of the 518 thoughts. So not a lot of people agreed that there's too much homework. But some people certainly did, and that's something that we have to take into consideration. Concern about kids where parents have to wait for music lessons at Sherwood. Some concern about vaping, which certainly is a concern that we all have and we're working at. A concern, there's a lack of communication from teachers and administration, but that kind of is not aligned with a lot of thoughts that were rated very highly that said there was good communication. So we're trying to take that into consideration. Something about kids needing more sleep, buses arriving too early. That's something that is actually a big focus for us this year in terms of sleep health and the potential for shifting school start times a year from now. And then, a sense that the communication from school can be confusing at times. Maybe there's too much or maybe a bombardment of it. How can we streamline it? So that's something that this person had that did not get a lot of traction with other ratings, but again, something for us to take into consideration. Again, someone saying not having enough information, comment feeling that their kids academic needs were not being met and that they're bored in school. Someone saying they wanted more focus on social emotional learning, again, because it was not ranked highly, that suggests that people are feeling that there's a good focus on social emotional learning. Someone who's feeling that we need to stick to the basics more. iPad use is important, and really feeling that we should do more of it. Again, so some of these things are in contradiction to each other, and that's expected. In terms of concerns about gun violence, concerns about how we can, getting along with other cultures, kids from other cultures. Someone who feels we should be using Chromebooks instead of iPads. Some people who just, again, felt that the rollout of the schedule at Oak in terms of when they got to their full schedule could have been faster. Sense that, a little bit more info from elementary teachers, COVID testing, how many emails they get from the school. And again, we're getting down to the thoughts that were actually had the least agreement from those who participated. And then finally, someone who's concerned that their child apparently was not allowed to wear an iWatch. And again, if someone has a specific issue or concern, obviously it'd be wise for them to reach out to their child's teacher or school administration if there's something they have a question about, because these are totally anonymous. We're not able to know who submitted these. concern that, few not wanted more kids to wear masks. Some are feeling the lunch is not cooked well. Would like to see a shift to, some different emphases in our SEL curriculum. And then the lowest rated thought from some that really weren't complete thoughts, which I'll show in a moment, was indicating that perception that there's a lot of racial bias in the school system, and that this takes opportunities away from non-white students, and that their perception that there are many teachers, administrators, and coaches who are part of this problem. And so, something, of course, that we've discussed and will continue to discuss in terms of it being equity and diversity and anti-racism being a very important obligation and responsibility that we have. But people not perceiving in this particular exchange that concern is something that they share relative to where that was ranked as a comment. And then just for transparency purposes, because you can see to the right, how many, the ranking out of how many comments. These were the last 4 comments, which really weren't anything. They were ranked low because they were just incomplete thoughts, and one that was probably the test that I did initially when we first launched it. So with that, when I reported out a couple of weeks ago or a month ago about our opening of school themes, I think the themes that we reported out on anecdotally at the time are reinforced by the feedback that we received, that we've had an excellent start, that we have a positive emotional climate right now, that there was an appreciation for a focus on kids feeling a sense of belonging, and that there certainly are challenges people are concerned about, and as well as opportunities that lie ahead. And again, as I mentioned earlier, there's always going to be conflicting perceptions. These were 2 different comments in the exchange. One, which was rated there as one of the on the lower end, but that person who feels strongly that, I'm sorry, the second one that's listed there is that we shouldn't have a dress code. But the comment on top is that people feel that we should be enforcing the dress code more specifically, and that it's making people uncomfortable if kids or certain students are not wearing clothing that the perception of this family would not be appropriate for a school environment. Another area that we always see conflict is homework. In terms of a comment talking about, well, hey, it's been proven from this person's perspective that it doesn't make a meaningful difference. And they want to see more of a healthy school life balance. And again, the comment I mentioned earlier where someone feels that it swung too far and there actually should be more homework that's being given to students. So again, that's something, we always have these tensions that we have to try to balance when we have people who are coming from different perspectives in a public school district. So to wrap up, what are we doing with this feedback? As I mentioned earlier, the leadership team's already reviewed this feedback twice in 2 different meetings. To look at what are some of the themes, what's going on. We certainly want to continue practices that the feedback suggests are working well. Consider ways to address any specific concerns. As I mentioned earlier, we have a very big project going on right now with our Sleep Health Advisory Committee that's addressing the concerns or the questions about how much sleep students might be getting and how start times might be playing into that. And this is certainly information that's helpful as we start this ongoing work to develop our next strategic plan, which is work we'll be doing in the coming months. So I do appreciate the feedback that people submitted. And this time I'd be happy to hear any comments or questions that the committee has.
Colleagues, any questions or comments for Dr. Sawyer? Please.
I just want to thank the members of the community and our parents in particular who took the time to participate in this. I thought it was very informative and useful feedback. I also want to say I'm really pleased that we are using this particular platform. I certainly liked that the comments that were coming out on top that resonated with most of the folks were positive. Having said that, I also like the transparency of members of the community having a platform to express something negative. And I think it is helpful for us as leaders in the district to be able to see all that. But again, I think it speaks to giving everyone a voice. So I am pleased with the approach that we have taken to this, and I want to just again extend my thanks to everyone who took the time to participate.
I agree with Mr. Palich. I think it's collaboration. It's something that we do in most of our decision making. We reach out to the community, stakeholders, anyone involved, so that we have data to make our decisions. It's not top-down decision. It's a very collaborative, data-driven, and I think reading through all of these comments, it's very valuable feedback for us as a school committee. I also want to highlight the amount of comments about how strong our staff is, how caring they are, how hard they work. That was throughout even if they might had something constructive, they also had a lot of comments about how well our staff has done, so I think they should be commended for that. And it does feed right into our next phase of strategic priorities, so this is a very timely report.
Yeah, I agree with both my colleagues. I think what I was struck by was the overwhelmingly positive comments with teacher and student engagement that was consistent throughout many of the comments. Also appreciate the constructive feedback around technology. I think that's a challenge that we face right now. I heard a lot of the comments in some of the sessions we sat in the school council about how you balance those soft skills, the written skills with the technology, where we've been so dependent on technology for the last 2 years. Very big challenge there, as well as the homework discussion too. It's hard to balance what's needed versus giving students more of a break. So,
Thank you. I think, Dr. Sawyer, one of the things that I think about here is agree certainly with all my colleagues, this overarching, what do we want to keep, what do we want to enhance, what do we want to do better, and for me right now, I'm thinking this year, there's sort of near term is, for your team, what can we do right away? Some comments about bus lines or whatnot, which is always a source of some headache, or drop off lines, but what are we doing next year in the budget? What do we want to keep there? Things like the late bus, things like start time, things like class sizes. It was commented on that, particularly at the elementary level. And then what do we want to build on, or what do we need to do more work on, particularly around our next strategic plan? What are a little bit longer term comments around equity, comments around the balance in homework, the balance in technology? Are we getting that right? And there's always some room to see if the pendulum has swung too far. But I certainly want to really call out areas that the areas both of appreciation for our staff and the communication. Those take a lot of work and effort. that's people who are working really hard and have full jobs. And as a parent who gets lots of communications on a Sunday, I hope they're scheduled to send and they're not actually composing them all on a Sunday. But those are important, and they tell me as a parent what's going on and what's happening, and then it filters right through at the building level and then with teachers. So I know there's a lot there, and I hope that our staff are that they see this and they feel heard and they feel appreciated. And I hope that there's an opportunity for at the professional and paraprofessional level to see you're making a difference. And so it's not just for our principals to look at, but it's, that there's a lot of really positive things to build off of here. So thank you for spending the time and effort. And I look forward to the next one. I think these are fascinating. I want to understand the algorithm more, but I'm just going to lean into it and accept it. And anything else that you'd like to say, Dr. Sawyer?
Just a couple of things.
Please.
I appreciate that the comments, and I think it can be a very useful tool for us. For those interested, the school committee in your packet had the entirety of all the comments that you were able to review. That will be posted with the school committee materials on the website tomorrow for people who are interested, and I'll work to get that link out in probably the next update that I send out, just so people have access to it and can see, if they're interested in seeing more of what people put in, and just out of again, continued transparency around that. I also do want to certainly commend, we couldn't be off to such a strong start without the quality of the work that our staff is doing. And, that's something that they're working hard at. And particularly, I do want to also commend the principals in particular around the communications that they're making sure families get each week to be able to, and also provide a conduit for our PTOs and parent groups to communicate as well as the community bulletin the families receive each week, which a lot of opportunities and information about things they can do, from our Shrewsbury Public Library events to Parks and Recreation to other local opportunities or through our schools. But again, it's helpful feedback. We plan on using this tool again with more of a tell us what you think we should be looking at, kind of 5 years out. And we should look for that sometime later in the fall. And we did a parallel thought exchange with our staff internally that we'll be feeding back to them as well. And again, that's also what our leadership team has reviewed that as well, because our staff perspectives around, again, what we're doing well, what we can do better, how we can better support students and support them is very important to us. We're pleased to be able to share this, and appreciate the feedback from you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Move on to our next time scheduled appointment, and that is looking at the superintendent's goals. I know there's a memo in our packet from you, Dr. Sawyer, for both a presentation and potentially a vote this evening. So each year, the superintendent's goals present some performance goals to the school committee as part of our evaluation process, and then we come back and review those at the end of the academic year. So consistent with that evaluation process is mandated by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. Dr. Sawyer, I know you're here to present some potential goals and professional practice goals. It has some particular verbiage that doesn't always roll off the tongue for those not in the education field, those student learning goals and professional practice goals, and other goals related to student health, well-being, and our strategy. So I will turn it over to you, Dr. Sawyer.
Thank you. I just have, I'll bring those up on slides so you can see them and people who are watching can review them as well. This is part of the overall required, again, state Department of Elementary and Secondary Education system for evaluating superintendents as well as other staff, and our other professional staff will be setting these goals over the course of the coming weeks as part of their evaluation process as well. It is, there's a sense of, or looking for the word here, not euphemism, what am I looking for? An acronym. This acronym of SMART goals is something that's used in a lot of different fields, and sometimes I was talking with Mr. Wensky earlier, and some fields, some of the letters or terms are a little bit different, but what the Massachusetts Department of Education says it stands for is specific and strategic, measurable, action-oriented, rigorous, realistic, and results-focused, and timed and tracked. And so that's something that you want to try to hit those elements when setting goals. A student learning goal is required, and that learning goal that I'm putting forward this evening is that in the coming months that I will be taking steps to seek an understanding of what the effects have been of the pandemic around students' collective academic progress as well as their social and emotional well-being, and to report out on those things. You may recall, those watching, that this was one of my goals last year. And the school committee was very gracious in that, although I think we did some work around this, I did not do it the way I had intended because of the nature of the last school year. It took us in some different directions, and again, I appreciated that grace. But in terms of, I think the timing actually to continue to focus on this is good, with us putting together at the same time, looking at a new strategic plan, trying to look at both short-term and longer-term, what might need to do as we emerge from the pandemic and the effects that did have on our students and our schools. As far as the action steps that are intended to achieve this, we'll be looking for opportunities to interact with students at each of our grade spans, including some focus groups or meeting with student leadership groups, interacting with staff in different ways. We have advisory councils. I'll be looking to schedule some time with opportunities with different groups of staff in the coming months. As far as families as well, through leadership groups, advisory councils, we actually just had our all-school council meeting this past week, where we were able to get feedback from in a variety of things. Ms. Clowder helped us and organize that meeting. Analyzing data, and there'll be a report probably in early December. We will go very deep into what the state testing showed us in terms of this past year. We're already underway analyzing that data. It's a lot, but making sense of that, as well as other survey instruments, our panorama surveys, and looking at that in a variety of ways. Are we having disparate outcomes depending on different student demographic groups? And then finally, synthesizing that information and comparing it, not only looking at locally, but what is it, whether it's districts we typically are compared to, state level data, national level data, what do those circumstances look like? So that's the learning goal, kind of an overarching approach. In terms of student health and well-being, this is a different goal than last year and updated and very specific to this issue that is part of our 5-year strategic plan that we're wrapping up in this calendar year 2022, is to look at start times and the sleep and health of students. And whether or not that might include changes to start times. And we have already convened a sleep health advisory committee to the superintendent involving high school students, a variety of parents and staff from across the district to study the science, the logistics, best practices, And ultimately, we'll be bringing some recommendations forward, and that's scheduled to come forward to you in mid-December with some options that to potentially adopt for the 2023-24 school year. In doing that, we'll use Thought Exchange as a tool. We'll likely use SurveyMonkey as well, once those options are out on the table in December, to get feedback about what that looks like from the various stakeholder groups. And obviously, we want to communicate information about this, and we'll be what we're calling task groups that are essentially subcommittees of the advisory committee will be making different presentations to the school committee starting in November and through December. In terms of district strategy, as we've referred to multiple times this evening, we are working to create an updated set of 5-year strategic priorities and goals. Again, looking to get stakeholder feedback, participate in various forums, taking a look at where students are academically and socially and emotionally. I'm also already participating along with Ms. Clowder, and our full team, leadership team will be participating in as well at a point later this year. My state association, the Massachusetts Association of School Superintendents, has put together a program that I believe is very high quality relative to advancing issues around equity and diversity and inclusion. And I'm confident that our proposed 5-year goals and strategic priorities will include some elements relative to the work that we have been doing and need to continue to do to advance equity and anti-racism. If we do have any outside consultants around this work, to work with them as necessary to develop that updated plan. As far as my professional practice goal, again, required by the way that the state organizes this, this is again is a goal that I had last year, made some progress on, but not as much as I would have liked. I was certainly, in the previous report, I'm pleased that we had so many comments and a lot of agreement around that there's been strong communication from the district, but sensitive to the fact that we want communication to work well for everyone and to the greatest extent we possibly can. There'll be another report coming up later in this meeting about a way of doing that through translation for families who need that. But working on both external and internal communications, certainly I know lots of people are feeling in this day and age just overwhelmed by the amount of information that's coming at us, whether that's through internal channels or external channels, and how can we look at what are some good exemplars that might be out there, what are protocols we can use so there's predictability, streamlining where that's appropriate, and making sure that we're finding out and continuing to get feedback of what's working and what's not working for various stakeholders. So communication, again, being one of our core values, and organizations that communicate very well tend to be more successful, and so I think it's a good place to put some time and effort. So with that, those are the goals that I have proposed for your approval this evening that I will be working on in the coming months along this school year. I'm giving my best guess around timing. Obviously, as the year goes, those might need to flex a little bit, but certainly areas where I want to be focusing my time and energy through my role. And would be happy to get any feedback or comments, and would ask if you're comfortable that you vote to approve these goals this evening.
Thank you, Dr. Sawyer. And let me turn it over to any of my colleagues for any comments or questions. Please, Ms. Boucher.
Thank you, Dr. Sawyer. I thought these goals were right on for this year. I thought they were excellent. I was pleased to see that the first goal with regard to the effects of the pandemic focused not only on academics, but also on the social and emotional well-being of the students as well, because I think obviously that's going to be a big focus to check in on the mental health of the students this year as well as the academics. And additionally, the strategic priorities goal I thought was also excellent, and I think that captures a lot. I think underneath that, we'll also be able to look at vocational educational and also diversity and equity, as you mentioned. So I thought they were excellent, and I would fully support them.
Thank you.
I also feel they're spot on. I think, as Ms. Boucher mentioned, they capture what we're looking for and what we're hearing about that we need to start focusing on as we return to more normalcy in the schools. And it's going to provide valuable information for us as we move into strategic priorities and the FY24 budget as well. So I know you said timing could be a little squishy, but I think it's hopefully we'll get a lot of this in time for those two things to be settled.
Thank you.
would agree with my colleagues. I support these goals as well, and I just want to highlight in particular, I think a lot is living, so to speak, under the goal of the new 5-year strategic plan and priorities, because obviously within that, obviously are some key, very important topics, including the district's work on racial equity, diversity, and inclusion, but also setting the new 5-year strategic plan for the organization for the district is essentially setting the tone for the district through a massive stakeholder engagement process. So I support these goals, but there's one in particular where I think a lot of specifics are going to live.
Yeah, I agree with my colleagues. I think we're looking in all the right spots here for these goals, especially around the effects of the pandemic, and the impact to academics and well-being. I support these.
Thank you, and I certainly would echo my colleagues, but what I appreciate is that when I go back to my first year on the committee, there's some things that are still there that we're working on. Improved communication is always something I think good organizations should pay attention to, and clearly the new things that we have to be working on or doubling down on, the impacts of the pandemic, most importantly, sleep health has been a topic that's been discussed in this district for a very, very long time, but to say we're really trying to make some moves there, and certainly agree with my colleagues that I'm very happy with how you've framed out the strategic planning efforts this year. We've been talking now about it for 6 months, and we're sort of here and lots of work to happen before, if I have my time right, the sort of February timeline. And I'm really proud of the fact that our work around diversity, equity, and inclusion should be nestled in that was not, that effort is never sort of a one and done, that it has to be some ongoing work. So if we can to some degrees bake that work into all of our goals over the next 5 years, I hope we'll have some staying power and see some work that takes many years often to build up. I think about some of our presentations about diversifying our staff, and that is a many-year effort, not a short-term one. So I'm also quite pleased with what we have here. Given those comments, I'm taking the pulse of the room, and I feel like we're probably ready for a vote. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Dr. Sawyer, before we take a vote?
I appreciate the comments and certainly take those under advisement, and looking forward to doing the work.
Yeah, but I would also note, I really appreciate that many of them have touch points. I sort of started this saying for our evaluation at the end of the year, but many of these are really January, February, much earlier, and so I'm glad there'll be report outs. That a lot of these are really important work for the community at large. So if I can then, I'd be looking for a motion for the committee to vote to approve the superintendent goals for 2022-2023 school year as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. And all those in favor do so by signifying with an aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Thank you, Dr. Sawyer. That passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you. And at this point, I'm going to take things a little bit out of order, if I can, folks, and we're going to move to our item number, I don't know what our item number is, but it's our fiscal year 2024 budget priorities and guidelines. We have glad to have you with us, Mr. Collins. Our priorities and guidelines for fiscal year 2024 budget development. We start budget development early and always, I think also how we're doing this. So this is preparing for July 1's budgets for fiscal year 2024 for the school department budget. And this is designed, the guidelines are designed to provide some guidance to the superintendent and the school department administration regarding the development of our initial fiscal year 2024 school budget proposal. Both myself and Ms. Fritz are members of the Finance Committee, and I've worked with Dr. Sawyer and Mr. Collins to draft some guidelines, but we're here, I think, to share those tonight and to get some feedback from the community. Mr. Collins, am I turning it over to you to start, or Dr. Sawyer, did you want to begin?
I can just give a quick overview, and as mentioned, this is work that we've traditionally done at the start of each year, and I appreciate Ms. Heffernan and Ms. Fritz making up the Finance Subcommittee this year of the school committee, and meeting with us to have this initial discussion that helped us frame this initial draft. And essentially, this is the outline that the district administration uses to put together the initial superintendent's recommended budget that comes out in the winter. Timing-wise, probably in the February range based on the town's calendar, which isn't finalized yet. We'll bring a budget calendar to you at a future meeting when that's been solidified more. But in particular, Mr. Collins and his team, as they start to put together a variety of data that informs that, this by saying these are the priorities, by issuing these guidelines, it enables us to really focus our efforts in the direction that the school committee wants us to. And so it's a process that's worked very well for us, and I anticipate it will continue to do so. But with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Collins, who can talk a bit about what the specifics are that are in this draft for discussion this evening. And again, this evening, just looking for any feedback from the committee, and then it will be posted on our website. Any feedback from the community is welcome, of course, between now and your next meeting 2 weeks from this evening, when we'll ask you to vote to approve this as the official set of priorities and guidelines for fiscal year 2024. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Collins.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Soros. So here we are kicking off the fiscal 24 process in mid-October. And I won't repeat any of the kind of contextual background that Mrs. Heffernan, Dr. Sawyer provided. I'll just kind of, in terms of the overview, kind of the bigger picture pieces relative to fiscal 24, as articulated here, that we're clearly shifting kind of away from the medical component of the COVID pandemic, and kind of the big picture things that we're looking at for fiscal 24 in the larger context are the impacts of kind of this new phenomenon, which is high inflation, which is impacting various aspects of our budget. And then also, as was referenced earlier, the onset of a new strategic plan, 5-year strategic plan for the district. So those are kind of larger aspects of in the driving many different factors with respect to the fiscal 24 budget funding. In terms of the priorities, I won't go through each of these, but I do want to highlight a couple of things which are first and foremost, as we discussed in the subcommittee meeting, that it's really paramount that we develop a budget that meets the commitments that are detailed in the March 16th, 2021 override statement to the residents of Shrewsbury and agreed upon between the Board of Selectmen and the school committee. And effectively what that says is that with the successful passage of the override, that what that came with was successive year budget caps, in that our budget cannot exceed 4.25% for the upcoming year, with the possibility of some increase beyond that depending on the town manager's revenue forecast. And if that comes to play, then there could be some slight increases. But we're working within a budget cap. That's what that override statement says, in order to provide surety around the longevity of the override that was passed for fiscal 22. Number two is resources. Number two priority is resources for the continued progress towards the fulfillment of the current strategic plan, which there are a few items still left unfinished business, and then also consideration of the highest priorities coming out of the new strategic planning process. And certainly the new strategic plan, which is a 5-year plan, is not intended, of course, to be completed in fiscal 24, but rather that's a multi-year process. And so, we'll be putting together a budget based upon the school committee decision-making and input around what are the most salient things that we think that could begin in fiscal 24 as part of that new strategic plan. Under that particular priority, I just want to highlight a couple of things. And again, these are things that are on everybody's screen, and that is consideration for some additional resources that might be needed to explore the creation of in-district vocational programs at the high school, or create partnerships with area businesses for similar types of student experiential learning opportunities. And we know from prior discussions and meetings here that it's really not feasible to replicate what's happening at Assabet Valley Technical High School in really any fashion. Those programs require a significant amount of space, which we don't have, and a significant amount of capital investment in equipment, which would be equally difficult to try to attain. So, we're looking for some alternative solutions, and would be looking for some alternative solutions to service that student population who are interested in those types of programs for fiscal '24. And, as you've discussed here, continuing to work, more in parallel, but more globally around this whole statewide issue of how do we solve this problem of not having enough seats, that the demand for the seats exceeds the supply of seats. So working on that particular issue on multiple fronts. Another kind of sub-bullet for this priority is looking for additional resources for our English language learner population, which is growing in size and complexity. And you're going to hear a little bit more about that this evening. Also, as was referenced earlier, is to look at what might be any kind of outcome from the Sleep Health Committee or the School Start Times Committee, whichever way you want to describe that, and what that might mean in terms of potentially additional busing costs or other ripple effects of changing start times. So those are just some of the highlights. Again, another one I would make mention of, and you'll hear more about this at your next school committee meeting, is we want to make sure that we're providing the right kind of resources for students with special needs. And you're going to hear from Mrs. Belcito about kind of the insourcing, if you will, of our 18 to 22-year-old transitions program, also known as the RISE program. We want to make sure that that is appropriately funded, and we expect to have some kind of positive news on that front and more details at your upcoming meeting. Shifting a bit to assumptions for fiscal '24 and some guidance. Some of these assumptions and guidance pieces are you've seen in other prior year budgets. This is an important document that does make it into our overall budget book that's made available publicly. It drives funding decisions, but certainly we want to make sure we're reflecting the terms of all of our collective bargaining agreements, all of which will be in place for fiscal '24. Our teachers, our assistant principals, our paraprofessionals. So those are all known costs, which is good, and those were finalized with the override agreement kind of guidepost, if you will. So we should be in solid shape there. Number 4, in terms of the assumptions, I just want to highlight again this inflation impact, and we did receive the annual letter that we get about the state-approved tuition rates for private special education schools. And they are calling for a 14% increase in tuitions for fiscal '24, which is highest any of us in this field have ever seen for decades. And I know Dr. Sawyer just sent a letter to the Operational Services Division at the state asking for further clarification. This is an issue that's on everybody's screen in terms of the professional associations, from superintendents to school business officials, and so we want to see how that plays out. But right now, for example, if a annual special education tuition cost for this year was $100,000, for example, then next year, of course, would be $114,000. And that's more than double than what we're typically budgeting. It's probably closer to triple in terms of what we're budgeting typically for those rate increases. So that's going to have to be something that we monitor closely as we move ahead in developing the budget. Number 7, I want to talk a little bit about, because it was mentioned at the outset of the meeting by Dr. Sawyer, which is the removal of the student activity fee. I know the school committee is very conscious about this issue of cost for participation in activities, in sports, in busing, and preschool at this point. And some of the major decisions that you've made recently included the removal of the full-day kindergarten tuition fee altogether, along with the student activity fee, and then currently, for this year, holding fast on any increases, knowing that the override had passed and that, all families are kind of facing pressure with, again, this inflation factor. So those costs also impact our costs. Those inflation factors impact our costs. So you've got this, situation to deal with is how do we deal with our rising costs to provide those services, but also take into consideration the impact on the families. So we want to have kind of an earlier conversation about the fee levels for all of our programs where we're charging a fee early in the budget process. And then number 9, I know, again, based upon the subcommittee work, I think this is helpful guidance. An assumption for us is to know that right now the intent would be to assume no new school choice seats, subject to school committee vote, of course, further in this school year for formal action. But given the space constraints that we have, especially at the secondary schools, that this would be a wise decision. Again, if the school committee were to decide to open up some seats at any grade level, and you could start at any grade level, as you know, those students have a right to remain in the district all the way through graduation. So eventually they're going to make it to, if they started elementary, they'd make it through Sherwood, Oak, and the high school, and we're very constrained for space, especially at the high school, and certainly tight on space at Sherwood and Oak as well. So having that assumption that there's no new school choice seats is helpful at this particular point. We just won't budget for any new additional revenue for those incoming children. So those are just some of the summary highlights. You have kind of the full document here. Happy to answer any or respond to any comments or questions. And as Dr. Sori mentioned, this would be something that would be on a future school committee meeting for your vote to formalize this. And we did not include a fiscal 24 budget calendar yet because the town has not really set their budget calendar yet, and that's kind of a touchstone for ours as well. So we're just going to wait a little bit on that piece. So that's what I have for you with respect to the fiscal 24 budget priorities and guidance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Collins.
Sure.
Comments or questions? Yes, please, Mr. Wensky.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation and the work that went into these priorities. Budget season's back, which doesn't really ever go away, does it? And I think every budget season's like a puzzle, right? And there are many variables to it. And clearly, there are 2 key variables that you just noted, number 4 and 5 on your list, which is the impact of the new transportation contract and that pretty significant increase to the tuition costs. It'll definitely impact what we're able to do, but I think the good news story here is that we have predictability and financial stability through this override framework that we are now in the 2nd consecutive year leveraging. So it'll be another interesting cycle, but it's at least you have some level of a confidence knowing what you have to work with, because we didn't have that luxury prior to the agreement that was forged between the school committee and the board of selectmen and the town manager, and of course ultimately the residents decided to invest in services in the town, and that was a very significant move, and it still remains true today. So,
John, Ms.
I agree with Mr. Wensky. I think we've got that confidence around what the budget will be because of the agreement with the Board of Selectmen, but we also have the added increase of inflation, which we did talk a little about in our last budget cycle, but we're seeing significant increases just in the cost of doing business. And that, I think, is something we're going to have to weigh heavily, because how those increases going to affect what we can do for new initiatives or anything additional in the budget. That, to me, is a concern. And one comment I had is on the Collins report, because I know we received that in April of 19. So looking at the age of that report and how relevant some of those suggestions may be now, and maybe there are some that aren't, but there are things that we now need to add that aren't in that report. So I think that report is good for guidance, but I think we have to look at where are we now in 2022 after the pandemic, how we've changed, maybe how we do some things.
Sure.
So I think that report has to be looked at
Sure.
going forward. And the other suggestion, I think our first workshop is in December. I think this is gonna be a busy and difficult budget cycle again, and maybe having an earlier workshop for us to start planning, even without the town schedule, just to kind of look at what we think we need to do, where we're going with all of these issues.
Just to thank Mr. Collins for the presentation, I think that the draft before us represents a fair outline of everything we're gonna have to consider as we develop the budget. Obviously, to outline our priorities is to say nothing of what the actual budget is going to look like. But I think that this, to my mind, is a fair reflection of all of the things that we need to take into consideration as we go about this process.
Thank you. Shay?
I agree with my colleagues. I think the assumptions and guidance and the priorities that have been laid out are very helpful. I think it'll, and I agree with Sandy's recommendation that we maybe meet prior to December, just given that there might be some complexities here that we'd like to flesh out. So, but other than that, I thought that was very helpful. So thank you.
Sure.
I certainly agree with my colleagues when I think about how monumental it was for the override stabilization fund to be created, for that agreement of 4.25% at the time we were sort of cheering, and then you see numbers like 14%, and those are now we have to live within our means, and 4.25 is not really keeping pace on a bunch of levels. Just as I was driving here tonight, they were saying the cost of fruit is up 20% and cost of vegetables is up 40%. So I'm thinking about that other side of the fees for families, and families,
Right.
that is a place that historically as a community we've sort of run to in times of need, and that they're feeling those pressures as well. And I remember you giving as an example, Mr. Collins, during our subcommittee meeting, the cost of art supplies going up, and so inflation hits us across a variety of spectrum in the budget. So I think it's also important. There's a bunch of stuff baked in here that feels important to call out. Most of which you covered, Mr. Collins, but I would just add in what our new transportation contract is going to look like is another huge point of variability, but increase in costs is coming our way. Transportation has not gotten cheaper; it's gotten more expensive, and that's an important piece of business over this coming year for us to prepare for. Also, while not directly related, it is related in many ways when we think about what our asks are to the community to support schools writ large, and things like school choice seats. The town and the district are undergoing a space study to look at all of our capital needs. This is our operating budget, but what are the capital potential things that are coming? And I will try to get back to my colleagues soon with a confirmed date. We're aiming for November, and before the Thanksgiving hits us, to have a joint meeting with the Board of Selectmen and the school committee to look at the issues around space, and also to talk about the override funds. I certainly appreciate the transparency that we now have. Town meeting members know when transfers are happening to that fund, and we have that regular meeting on the books multiple times a year to just talk about where that is. But there's a lot here. I appreciate your efforts to draft it. I would ask Dr. Sawyer, we have an incredibly long book this time around, and I just would like to make sure our people can find this document and comment and give us some feedback. So if there's a way over the next couple of weeks we can pull out these 2 pages amongst the 100 and something, I would love them to read all of the thought exchange, but if we can make it a little easier to find, and would welcome community members. Our intention would be to take a vote on this document. As it says, it's guidance. There's a lot that changes over the course of a budget cycle, but important for us to hear from the community if we've sort of gotten it right. So if we can invite community members to give us some feedback and make it as available in all the different channels you have, so that people can come back to us, and hopefully 2 weeks from tonight we can finalize this document. But Dr. Sawyer, any feedback for you and your team on some of the comments from the committee members?
Sure, and just to that question about how it's found on our website, and all families and community members who are on our listserv and staff members, when they receive my email of a reminder that we have a meeting this evening, I include several links. One of those links is to a link that has every report separately. It's not just the full meeting book, but each report that we give or any document that's been associated with the meeting gets posted with its own link. So that will be there at that link, and we can also send that out separately as well. So I appreciate that suggestion. In terms of, again, the comments are very, we can certainly, we'll take that into consideration and look at ways that, some of the language might be adjusted based on the feedback you just gave for the final version that we'll ask you to vote on at your next meeting. And in terms of the, I'll certainly work with Ms. Heffernan in her role as chair around scheduling potentially, what that budget cycle looks like. And, obviously some of the information takes time to develop for us to present it to you. But as far as an earlier conversation, we're always happy to discuss this topic and provide any information. And again, Mr. Collins made the point earlier, this issue around the out-of-district special education, we're trying to get some more information about, is that a final number? Is it not a final number? Is there an opportunity for feedback? Frankly, in the past, we've always received a number that was very reasonable under, what the Operational Service Division does, that made sense in terms of the inflation factor and that kind of what we carried in the budget, and that's ultimately what it always has intended to be. They've added this year a factor for what they're calling workforce stabilization for the staffing of the private special education schools. From the materials we received initially, I can't seem to find how that was derived. So that's the question I've submitted to the representative, and hoping to get some answers for that in the near future. And we'll keep you posted on that because that is a significant impact in terms of what we'll have. The good news, of course, as has been mentioned, because the community gave such strong support to the school department through the recent override, we are in a much more stable and solid place financially. Our reserves are very solid in terms of our circuit breaker reserves. If this were pre-override and I saw these kind of inflation numbers, I would not be getting much sleep, I think, even at this time of year. But the fact that we are on much more solid financial footing, it certainly doesn't mean that we can't. We need to pay attention to what's going on with it, and there could definitely be some impact, but not the way it would have been before the community made that larger investment in their community schools and municipal services. So I, again, continue to deeply appreciate it. It was a total game changer for what we're able to do and provide, and the stability it brings, which is really key. So we'll get back to you with an updated draft, and we'll look forward to bringing that back to you at the next meeting.
Great. Thank you so very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
And the next item on our agenda is one of our time-scheduled appointments, and that is around communication of translation for families. So a little background. In order to improve the district's ability to live up to its core values of collaboration and communication with families, last year a tool called Talking Points was adopted to allow for translated text communications between school personnel and families who do not speak English. We're pleased to have both Ms. Clouder and Ms. Christina Manos here to give us an overview of it and tell us how it's gone, what's going on. How are you? Thanks for being here.
Thanks for the
Thank you.
opportunity.
Yes.
I'm really pleased to introduce Christina Manos, who serves as her second year as the director of the English Language Education Department, and in her daily work supports and strengthens the hardworking language teachers that work within her department, but more importantly, I think raises awareness with general educators about how best to support our English learners, which, as was mentioned previously, is a growing population within our schools. So she's coming to us right from a family event at Beale, and I appreciate that you made time to be here today.
I'm very happy to be here. Thank you very much.
So I'm going to kick us off so she can catch her breath by reminding us of kind of how important it is to embed what we're talking about in the why. And I think when we think about looking at new practices or tools, it helps to kind of articulate what the value added of that tool is. So when we're talking very narrowly about a Talking Points tool, it's umbrellaed under the bigger commitment of belonging and making sure that all families feel connected to and part of and engaged by our school communities. And when we look at English learners, reducing barriers of access is really important. And so I just wanted to make sure that we nested that in terms of thinking about our welcoming messages, because often when you see a welcome message, even though the intention is to highlight the various languages in our district, often the English welcome is the biggest piece. Those aren't the people that really need to see the welcome. So you can see we've centered Portuguese here because that is by far the biggest, the language most spoken by our English learning families. And so as we think about that, paying attention to the cultural and linguistic implications of that are important. So in terms of best practice, DESE centers kind of effective family engagement in 3 realms. 1, making sure that we provide resources to convey welcome. 2, kind of thinking about ways of interacting with families that make them feel like they're approaching the school as equals, and in ways that invite two-way communication. So not just the school reaching out to home, but facilitating the home reaching out to school. And I think, as Dr. Sawyer referenced earlier, we've built a solid foundation for the welcoming part, and I think educators both understand the importance of and are committed to making every student and their family feel welcome in the district. At the same time, while our parent population has become more linguistically diverse, our educator population is not. And so there are some things that we can't anticipate or see because they have not been part of our lived experience. So for example, we might understand that we need to translate documents relating to an important parent meeting, but we might not think about that at curriculum night when we're handing out materials. We might think about, culturally, we're inviting questions at the end of the presentation and might not think, well, sometimes people would not think it's polite to ask a teacher questions. And so as we're working on communication, we're both responding to feedback from families, but also wanting to emphasize with educators kind of best practices when it comes to communication, and specifically when we're trying to engage diverse families. In terms of our communication, we've really diversified kind of the way we reach out to families. And so as we do that, we've thought about tools that are easily translatable. Obviously, teachers use School Messenger or email to communicate with families. Teachers use Seesaw, particularly the elementary level, or Schoology to facilitate communication with families. And tonight we're going to talk a little bit about Talking Points, which is another tool that we use to communicate with families. And when I think about communication, I think of 3 things. 1, kind of the complexity of the task when we say engaging families, what that means. Because it's not just the single email or communication, it's also the kind of the feeling and the spirit of welcoming families in. And that curriculum night example was one part of that. The second is the research that talks about the link between students achieving in school and families feeling engaged, and thinking about our English learner population is a subset of students for whom we're looking at student achievement gaps. And so as we're thinking about fostering communication, it's not just about belonging, it's also about helping students and families to focus on learning goals together and to make sure families have resources to support that learning at home. And finally, I'm mindful of the feedback that we get from families about the things that are working well and the things that maybe we need to fix. And in our recent our panorama survey midwinter last year that I know you've heard me present about, although our overall response rate indicated that people are not experiencing a lot of barriers to communication and engagement, one of the things that parents said that was a factor is how busy they are. So interestingly, 79% of our parents responded that very favorably that our teachers don't feel too busy for them, but they feel like their lives are too busy to always pay attention to our communications. So when we think about tools that we're using, finding things that are a good fit, not just for how we communicate, but using devices that facilitate kind of their, the way they take in information is really important. And so Talking Points fits that bill. And finally, I think this emphasizes really helpful communication tips overall, not just for English learners, but also it's a good reminder in terms of the way we communicate, keeping things simple, limiting acronyms, trying not to sound too like we're using EduSpeak, making sure that when we're sending something that it makes it easy to interpret it on the other side. And finally, as Brian LaRue would want me to emphasize, no matter what tool we're looking at, we want something that's going to ensure that we have security And so when we look at adopting a tool, we make sure that from an information technology standpoint, it's also been blessed by Brian LaRue and his team. So Christina's going to talk more specifically about the tool itself, but I thought it was important to kind of set the groundwork by explaining some of those things.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So of the many tools we have to communicate with families, Talking Points is my favorite for several reasons. And a little background, we sort of stumbled into Talking Points as we stumbled into many things during the pandemic when we were desperately trying to reach families. And there is a free version that teachers were using when we were trying really hard to connect with families. And they really liked it, and they found that it was a great way to get directly to families. And there's a few basic reasons for that. The first one, unlike other forms that we use, Talking Points communicates directly to a phone, and it doesn't communicate anywhere else. So it's not like I have to open my email and go through the 150 emails I got today to find the one from my child's teacher. It shows up as an SMS text message for families. And we find that even our newly arrived immigrant families and even our families that might be experiencing some form of housing security or transiency, they all have phones because phones are basically a required part of our life at this point. And for families that have just moved here, the phone is their lifeline to their family and their connections back in their home country as well. So it's something that they have a lot of facility with. It translates very easily for them, and they get messages right away. So if nothing else, that it hits us in, it's sort of our third appendage, right? That phone that's attached to everybody's hands, and that's where Talking Points messages show up. The other reasons that I really like Talking Points is it's some of the best artificial intelligence translation I've seen in tools like this, and it does it automatically. So if your family is flagged in PowerSchool as needing translation into Russian, when I send you a message on Talking Points, I type in English, you read in Russian. You respond in Russian, I read in English. So there's no compose my email, pass it through Google Translate, cut and paste, send it along. It happens just really organically and really easily, which is important for all of us. It's important for teachers and school staff as they're trying to reach out to connect with families, and it's removing another barrier to families and reaching out to us. The third thing that I love about Talking Points, it is, as Amy referenced, a two-way communication tool. It does not depend on a teacher or a school staff initiating a communication and then the parent has to respond to it. Parents can reach us on Talking Points, and a case in point, I was a little guilty of not checking Talking Points this summer, but in the middle of the summer I got a message from a family that had to move unexpectedly, and they wanted to let me know. And 2 weeks into the school year, somebody from Floral called me and said, "Do you know anything about whether this child moved or not?" And I said, "No." And then the next day I was in Talking Points, and lo and behold, the family had sent me a message on, July 5th saying, "We're moving, sorry, bye," kind of thing. And so it's just great that families see that as a tool that they can use to reach us, which is really, really wonderful. So those are the reasons that I really like Talking Points. I think I've talked through some of this already, but basically the benefits are that two-way multilingual family engagement piece, and it happens very organically. The other thing is, as I said, the translation is amazing, and during school hours, there's a live help feature. So imagine that you send a message to somebody and you reference filling out the application for free and reduced lunch as a piece of cake. And the family is reading the message in Arabic, and they're going, "Well, I guess you could have cake with school lunch, but I'm not really sure what they're saying," because the translation didn't pick up that it was an idiom. There's actually a question mark feature. You can hit the question mark feature in your app or on the website and say, "I don't understand this," and somebody will research it and come back and explain to you that piece of cake is an English/American idiom that means really easy. So this person was saying to you that this process is very easy. So I love that feature because we're all, even the EL teachers who are really trained to use simple English for good translation, we all use idioms all the time. We're not even aware of it. So the ability to get that human help on translation is really, really powerful. And again, families like to get messages on their phones. And the other thing, talking points tells you when you're being too complex, and it waves a little red flag at you if your message is too complicated, and it limits your characters as well. So it's really, for those busy families, it's hitting families with messages that are short, to the point, and very direct, which is important for translation, but also just important to make sure that our messages are getting to the intended target audience. So we had, as I said, during the pandemic years, dabbled in the free version, but with the support and encouragement of Brian LaRue and our tech department, we purchased a subscription in the fall of 2021. We had some surplus Title III grant money left on the table because we weren't running some of the programs that we typically would have run due to COVID. And so we purchased it last year. Our subscription covers 400 seats. Another really great thing about Talking Points is it's student-centered, not teacher-centered. So any person who interacts with student A in the district can communicate with that student's family. And the teachers are automatically loaded, but literally anyone, the school nurse, the lunch lady, the secretary, anybody can have a Talking Points account that links them to the students in their building. And so that's really helpful as well. We rolled it out last November, starting with the ELE teachers who were super excited to have the expanded features of the paid subscription, which is really nice. And we use it for any student who's flagged or who's marked or identified as an English learner, according to the Massachusetts guidance for how we identify English learners. And then we also have enough seats to have any student whose family is flagged for translation, regardless of whether they're an English learner or not. And sometimes that surprises people that we do have families in district whose children are not English learners, but the parents still require translation or interpretation. So it's a really helpful tool in that regard. A story I love to tell is that I was so excited when we brought this on that I went to Noelle Freeman, the director of nursing, and said, I have a great tool that I think would be helpful for your nurses. And in November of 2021, poor Noelle looked at me and said, I can't ask my nurses to take on something new right now. They're swamped. And I said, I respect that. When you're ready, let me know. And within the next 3 months, the nurses came to me, one by one. The EL teacher said, you have a way that I might get an answer from this family. Somebody in my building said, you could hook me up with this new tool, and I could use Portuguese to get the immunization record from this family. And so it's really been sort of delightful to see it spread by word of mouth. And people, probably every week I get at least one email from somebody in district saying, can you teach me how to use Talking Points? Can you get me a login? How do I use this again? And so it's really nice to see it just spread out that way. I really like that. So some statistics just to show you the use that we had last year. We started it in November, and this slide, I just happened to capture this day's data. Unfortunately, I can't go back and get the aggregate data for the whole academic year last year. But you can see last year we had 328 students in the system, and that those 328 students had 353 contacts. So the contacts are the adults that we're communicating with. We had 384 teachers using the system. For Talking Points perspective, everyone's a teacher. Admin in this case does not refer to principals. It refers to Eric Bauer and myself, who are the administrators for this system. And in that time, we sent 7,438 messages and used the different languages you can see listed there. As Ms. Clouder referenced, Portuguese is by far our most common language for interpretation and translation requests. We're approaching 50% of our families that require translation and interpretation requesting Portuguese. And you can see the statistics for this year just from the first day of school, August 30th to October 11th. Similar number of students, slightly more contacts, slightly more teachers, because we added a few. And we've already sent 1,307 messages. So it is being used, and I just think it's a great tool to have for everyone who needs it, and I really appreciate that. This is just a different way to look at some of the data. They define two different types of messages. There are messages and there are announcements. So the difference is if I wanted to reach out to you, Ms. Heffernan, about your child, I would send you a message. But if I wanted to send an announcement to the whole class to say, hey, don't forget ELE curriculum night is tonight, please come to Beal at 6:30, that would be flagged as a yellow one, an announcement. And so you can see that there were a lot of individual messages sent and then some blips of announcements along the way. And then this is the other side of that two-way communication. You can see the messages sent by parents from the first day of school. That's 441 individual messages sent by parents to us. So it really, we're still initiating it more, but they're giving it back to us. They're reaching out to us and they're responding to us, which is wonderful. This just gives you a little preview of what it looks like for teachers and what it looks like for families. The other thing that Brian LaRue really liked about Talking Points is that teachers can use their school device. Prior to getting Talking Points, a lot of teachers used WhatsApp, which is a very common communication tool, particularly for our Brazilian families. But WhatsApp works best on your phone, so we had teachers using a personal device to communicate with families, which is obviously not ideal. Talking Points, we can use our school device. We can use our laptops via their website or our iPads via an app or their website to initiate the conversation, which I really like because we're adding that layer of security and protection for our teachers, which of course is important. And again, as I mentioned, there's no need to handle translation ourselves. We're not running it through any website. It happens automatically. And we can send the one-on-one messages and we can send out a whole class announcement. And we also have the flexibility to create groups within Talking Points. So for instance, if you're a teacher, you can see your students and you can send a message directly to your Period 1 English class. But I can go in and create a group that's the first grade L's in the whole district. And I can send a message to all of the first grade L families, for instance. Families can receive and send messages in their home language, as it says. They either get an SMS text message right in whatever messaging app they use on their phone, or they can download the Talking Points app for families and use that app. The app gives them a few more features than just using the text messaging, but they're both very user-friendly and very easy for families to negotiate.
I think you covered.
Yeah, I think I have a habit of talking ahead. This just gives you a preview of some of the 100 languages that Talking Points uses. And two of the things that I particularly appreciate about Talking Points is they don't rest on their laurels. They are adding languages whenever they can. With the increase in refugees coming from Afghanistan, there's been an increased need for Farsi, which has been really important, so they're working on adding that. And they're also always working on improving their artificial intelligence translation as well to make sure it's getting better and better and smarter. So I appreciate that.
You want to try it?
Yes.
Okay.
So we set Amy up so we could give you a demo.
So here we go.
Oh, my glasses are here.
If we want to send a message, do you want me
So
to
yeah,
hit
click new message. So for a teacher, you log into the website, you click send a new message, just send a direct message, that's easier. And then you literally type in a child's first name. So where did I put you at Coolidge?
Yep.
So type Joao, Joao. And we have the only Joao at Coolidge is Joao Lucas Ramos Coleta. So we click on his name. You type the contents of the message, whatever you want to send to Joao's family, and then literally just click send, and off it goes. And when Joao's mother reads that message, she's reading it in Portuguese.
I'm not really going to send it.
No, because she'd be confused. So it really is that simple to use. I also find it just really intuitive. Like, a few people were like, oh, I'd like to use that, but I don't really think I have the time. I'm like, if you can log in, you can use it because you really just send a message, find a kid, and type your message. So are there any questions? Do you want to hear other things about talking points?
Thank you so very, very much. Colleagues, questions, please, Ms.
I
Smith.
think Dr. Sawyer mentioned earlier, communication is the key to any business, anything we do. We need to communicate well. And if the pandemic had a good thing, it actually made us look for ways to do things differently, and we had to do it fast. And maybe we wouldn't have even done this yet, because we look at things, we try it out. So I think these things happened because they needed to happen, and now we're finding they're adding so much value to what we do as a district and for these families, to be able to have this communication
Yes.
around their students, what's happening in our district, events. I think it's just great. It's wonderful. So thank you for shepherding this, and I think it's a big improvement on what we did in the past.
I would agree.
I appreciate the presentation. I like the idea of improving our accessibility for family engagement. I think this is a great tool. And you mentioned it has a maximum right now of 400 seats, right? So I assume there's additional fee to add
Exactly.
seats.
Exactly.
Yep. No, that's great. And then just so I understand how it works, so for those that want to just receive an SMS text, they must have to register through the system initially, or?
No, it's a great question,
Okay.
and I apologize for not addressing that. So we actually, with the help of our tech department, are able to import student and parent contacts over from PowerSchool.
Wow.
So assuming that a parent has a cell phone number in PowerSchool, Eric Bauer works his magic and we upload it, and then we automatically have the information there. So if a family changes their phone number, or if a new family comes after that upload, I have the capacity to manually enter that. So parents actually don't opt in. They can, however, opt out.
Okay.
And if they have the app, they also have the option of, if I'm communicating with you in Spanish and you're like, geez, Christina, my English is fine, please stop, you have the option of actually changing that language via the app and say, I want to receive the messages in English instead.
Got it. Well, yeah, thank you
So
for
it's nice.
pursuing this avenue, and kudos to our IT team as well for
Yes.
making this a reality. This is great. Thank you.
I think this is a wonderful tool, and for those families where English is not spoken at home, not having the ability to communicate with your kid's school could be everything. So I think that this is a wonderful example of technology enhancing our operations as a district. I also want to say I'm particularly pleased that they have a procedure in place to address idioms. I know that English, of all languages, English translates notoriously poorly because of our often over-reliance on idioms. So I'm glad that that's something that, if not always solved immediately, can be addressed if there is a issue in the translation.
Yes.
Please, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation. I think obviously anything that can make families feel more welcome, the sense of belonging, I think it's so key. I just was wondering if you've had feedback from the families and how they've responded to this, and has it been really embraced? And
Yes, families seem to really appreciate it. I think I already said the feedback from the staff has been phenomenal, and they're very happy to have it. But families really appreciate being able to communicate, and it's been helpful for seemingly mundane tasks, even getting paperwork signed and things like that. Or a child is sick and nobody's answering their phone, because if you don't recognize the phone number, you don't answer the phone, right? And if you don't speak English and you do recognize the phone number, you still might not answer the phone because, well, what are you going to say? So families really appreciate that they have a tool to communicate with us, and that they're receiving culturally proficient communications from us.
thank you very much.
You're welcome.
If I can, I certainly agree that you're sort of behind the scenes. They do some tech magic. I'm awfully glad that has been so well coordinated with the small but mighty IT team supporting a lot of this. And I noticed two questions, that in the languages for our district, it lists Portuguese and the second language is English. And is that because that's the translation back? So that's recognizing both sides of the communication, or is that what you were just mentioning that parents are saying?
That's what
"I'm
parents
all
are
set"?
choosing.
Thank you. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
So, not to interrupt,
Yeah,
but
please.
just as we have families who are not, the children are not English learner who require translation, many of our English learner families don't require translation and interpretation.
Okay. All right. No, good to know. Good to know. And just as Mr. Wensky was asking, sort of, subscription costs can go up. I would love a sense, and at some point this could be at another time, but to help us understand clearly there's lots of value here. Love to at some point understand what the cost is of the value, and so frankly we make sure to keep it in our budget.
Right.
And so the things that we started during the pandemic that we want to keep, we want to make sure we're planning for that. And so I don't know if there's a sense there, or if that's something that at a future date can be shared with us. But certainly seems like a very important tool, and one that we want to make sure we preserve to meet some of our ongoing goals.
Yes. No, I agree. I think you did the PO this year.
I wondered if you were going to turn to me again then.
I think can be deferred as a
So
question to come back.
we have their, no, I can tell you, we have their base plan. And that's why we have 400 seats, because that's their minimum plan. And it fit nicely with the number of English learners we have and the other families that are flagged. And I apologize for not knowing the exact cost, but last year when we signed up for it, it was right around $3,000 for those 400 seats. And I did get a quote for what it would look like for 6,000 students, and it was astronomical. So
Yeah.
we use it with the families that need it most.
Yep.
What is particularly nice, though, is we have the flexibility because we're not filling the full 400 seats. Like sometimes a nurse will call me and say, I can't reach this family any other way. They don't need translation, but could we add them to talking points? Because I want to see if they'll respond to a text. And it's nice to have that little wiggle room in there for that.
Well, it certainly seems like a huge value at that price point. So I was prepared for that number to be very different.
Yeah.
I was going to say, it's around $3,000.
Yeah.
But Dr. Sawyer, anything? Thank you for joining us this evening.
My pleasure.
Very, very helpful.
Yeah, no, I want to thank Ms. Cloud and Ms. Manos for the report but especially for the work that's been done. And, part of our commitment to trying to make people, all of our members of our school community feel that they belong, and includes our families. It's finding ways to communicate with them in ways that make that work for them. Just in terms of a statistic, a year, and we'll have our updated numbers that they're effective October 1st, likely at our first November meeting in terms of our annual report on enrollment and populations. But last year, 2021-22 school year, about 2.7% of our district of our students were qualified as English language learners. Which is roughly 150, 160 kids, I guess, on about 5,900 students we had last year total. In terms of the number of students whose family's first language is not English, or their first language is not English, that's over a third of our students, 36%. And whether that grows this year or not, we don't have the statistics yet. We'll find what those are. But making sure we're finding ways to reach families where the student may be becoming proficient in English, but the family is not yet. It only enhances their education, and our English language education department does an extraordinary job of working with students who arrive with none to very little English, or perhaps no academic English, and moving them very rapidly to learning and understanding English in a school context, and certainly in a cultural context, which is to their benefit for sure, while at the same time honoring the culture that they're coming from and bringing with them, which certainly enriches our school community and our community at large. And that's only going to continue in terms of the diversity of our community. I think we know that, and so the more responsive we can be, the better. And Ms. Manos, under her leadership, and the educators in that department are doing an outstanding job with it, and Ms. Clouder really continues to support that work. So again, we're appreciated sharing that. Obviously, you heard earlier, one of my goals is around communication. We're looking at all, and frankly, as these tools evolve, there may be other tools that are coming or that are out there that we can look at that for all families that could streamline communication. But this is one right now that's with a focus on translation that is working very well for us, and thought it was a good idea to bring it to you so you get a sense of it. And again, ways that we're making sure that we're doing our best to reach all of our families and our students. So thank you.
Thanks for being with us tonight.
My pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity. Nice to see you all.
And I hope the event at Beale was good for the families.
Yes.
That's good. Okay. Next on our agenda, we have approval of meeting minutes from September 28th, 2022. Those were distributed prior to the meeting. Did anyone have any edits or revisions? Seeing none, those can be marked as approved as distributed. And lastly, we do need to go into executive session this evening, so I would like to request a motion for us to adjourn to executive session for the purposes of addressing Mass General Law 30A 21A7 to comply with or act under the authority of any general or special law or federal grant and aid requirement known as Purpose 7 of open meeting law for the purpose of reviewing, approving, or releasing executive session minutes, and also for the purposes of addressing Mass General Law 30A 21A3, also known as Purpose 3, to discuss strategy in respect to collective bargaining or litigation if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on our bargaining or litigation purposes, position of the public body, and the chair so declares as relative to Shrewsbury Educational Association's Units A and/or B, Shrewsbury Paraprofessional, and the Cafeteria Workers Association. And we will return to open session only for the purposes of adjourning for the evening. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. And a roll call vote is required. Ms. Fritz?
Aye.
Mr. Wensky?
Aye.
Mr. Palich?
Aye.
Ms. Boucher?
Aye.
And myself? Aye. Thank you and have a good night.